The morning jogger expected to find nothing more than fallen leaves and morning dew on the forest trail. Instead, she found a blood-stained shirt hanging from a low branch, like a twisted flag of surrender, swaying gently in the October wind. The fabric was torn, fresh enough that the metallic smell of blood still lingered in the crisp air, mixing with the earthy scent of decomposing leaves. Before we dive into this mystery, please like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what you think happened. Your opinion could be the key to understanding this story. Just 48 hours earlier, Sarah and Michael Thompson had been laughing over coffee in their cozy kitchen, planning what should have been a simple anniversary hike through Blackwood Forest. Sarah, a 29-year-old teacher with infectious enthusiasm, had circled the date on their calendar 3 weeks prior. Michael, her husband of 5 years, and a cautious accountant by nature, had initially hesitated about the remote location, but Sarah's excitement was impossible to resist. "It'll be perfect," she had said, her green eyes sparkling as she showed him the trail map on her phone. "Just us, nature, and no cell phone service for miles." The irony of those words would haunt everyone who knew them. The couple had left their suburban home at dawn on Friday, October 13th. Their neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, remembered waving goodbye as they loaded their matching blue backpacks into Michael's silver Honda. Sarah wore her lucky red flannel shirt, the EB Don, same one that would later be found torn and bloodied, hanging like a nightmare from that oak branch. The Blackwood Forest had always carried whispers among locals. Dense, sprawling across nearly 10,000 acres of untamed wilderness, it was the kind of place where cell towers couldn't reach, and hiking trails seemed to shift when no one was looking. Veterans of the area spoke in hushed tones about the strange sounds that echoed through the trees after dark, and the inexplicable cold spots that could be found even during summer months. When Sarah and Michael failed to return by Sunday evening, their families initially assumed they had simply lost track of time. Michael was known for his meticulous planning, but Sarah had a way of convincing him to extend their adventures. It wasn't until Monday morning, when Michael missed an important client meeting without any communication, that real concern set in. The search began immediately. Local authorities and volunteer rescue teams combed through miles of forest trails. Dogs picked up the couple's scent near the entrance, but lost it mysteriously 2 miles in, where trees grew thicker and shadows deeper. Then came Tuesday morning, and Jennifer Walsh's discovery. Jennifer, a dedicated runner, had been following her usual route when red fabric caught her eye. The shirt stood out against dark bark like a wound. Morning sun revealed dark stains that turned her stomach. But what unsettled her most wasn't the blood. It was how deliberately placed the shirt seemed. But what really happened in those woods? And why would someone leave such an obvious clue in plain sight? The discovery of Sarah's shirt marked the beginning of an investigation that would uncover secrets darker than the forest shadows themselves, secrets that some people would kill to keep buried. Detective Mark Harrison arrived at the scene within the hour, his weathered face grim as he examined the blood-stained shirt. 20 years of police work had taught him to read crime scenes like books, but this one whispered secrets he couldn't yet understand. The fabric hung at eye level, deliberately positioned where any passerby would notice. Fresh blood, no more than 2 days old, had soaked through the cotton fibers and dripped onto the fallen leaves below. But something felt wrong. The blood pattern was too clean, too concentrated in specific areas. Harrison's forensic team worked methodically around the oak tree, photographing every angle, collecting every sample. The shirt showed 3 distinct tear marks across the chest area, consistent with sharp claws or a blade. Yet no blood trail led away from the tree, no footprints in the soft earth beneath. Sarah Thompson's sister, Rebecca, arrived as the sun reached its peak. Her hands trembled as she identified the red flannel, the same shirt Sarah had worn to their family barbecue just 2 weeks earlier. Rebecca's face drained of color when she noticed something the investigators had missed. "The buttons," she whispered, pointing to the shirt's collar. Sarah always fastened the top button, always, even when it was warm. The shirt hung open, all buttons undone, flapping in the afternoon breeze like a surrender flag. The search dogs returned that afternoon, their handlers looking puzzled. Rex, the most experienced bloodhound, had followed a scent trail from the parking area to the shirt location. But instead of continuing deeper into the forest, he circled the oak tree repeatedly, whining with confusion. "It's like the scent just stops here," his handler explained to Harrison. "Not fades away, stops, like they vanished into thin air." As daylight faded, the search teams expanded their grid pattern. Volunteers combed through thick underbrush, while authorities checked every cave and ravine within a 5-mile radius. The forest seemed to swallow their voices, returning only echoes that sounded distorted among the dense trees. Michael's brother, David, joined the search, his businessman's logic struggling to accept the inexplicable evidence. He studied maps obsessively, marking potential routes his brother might have taken. But every logical path led back to that oak tree, to that impossibly placed shirt. Night brought no answers, only deeper questions. As Harrison packed up the evidence bags, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching from the tree line. The forest held its secrets close, and whatever had happened to Sarah and Michael Thompson was just the beginning of something much darker. What secrets was Blackwood Forest hiding? And why did it feel like the couple's disappearance was exactly what someone had wanted? The security footage from Miller's gas station revealed the couple's last confirmed location. Sarah and Michael had stopped there Friday morning at 7:43 a.m., filling up their Honda and purchasing trail mix and water bottles. Michael appeared relaxed, even smiling as he paid the cashier. Sarah waited in the passenger seat, checking her phone one final time before they entered the dead zone. Detective Harrison studied the grainy footage repeatedly, searching for anything unusual. The timestamp showed they left the station at 7:51 a.m. The forest entrance was only 12 minutes away, meaning they'd reached the trailhead by 8 o'clock at the latest. But here's where the timeline became disturbing. Their car was found in the parking lot Tuesday morning, covered in a thin layer of autumn leaves, as if it had been sitting there for days. The doors were unlocked, keys still in the ignition, Sarah's purse untouched on the dashboard. A park ranger named Tom Bradley had patrolled the area Monday evening around 6 p.m. He swore the silver Honda wasn't there then. The car had appeared sometime between Monday night and Tuesday dawn, placed as deliberately as the blood-stained shirt. Harrison's team processed the vehicle methodically. No signs of struggle, no blood, no fingerprints except those belonging to Sarah and Michael. Even more puzzling, the gas tank was still 3/4 full, exactly as it would have been after their Friday morning fill-up. The couple's cell phones were nowhere to be found. Their last digital traces showed text messages sent Thursday night, confirming their Friday morning departure. After that, complete digital silence, as if they'd been erased from existence. Security cameras from nearby businesses caught Michael's Honda heading toward Blackwood Forest Friday morning. But no cameras captured it leaving. For 4 days, the car had simply vanished, only to reappear in the exact spot where the couple would have parked. Local mechanic Jim Santos examined the Honda at Harrison's request. The engine was cold, hadn't been run in hours. But the odometer showed no additional mileage beyond the trip to the forest. Whoever had moved the car knew exactly where to place it. The investigation expanded to nearby hospitals and morgues. Perhaps the couple had been injured, taken somewhere for help. Phone calls to medical facilities within a 100-mile radius yielded nothing. No John or Jane Does matching their descriptions, no emergency room visits, no accidents reported. As night fell on the second day of investigation, Harrison stood in the forest parking lot, studying the empty space where the Honda had been found. The autumn wind carried sounds that made his skin crawl, branches creaking, leaves rustling, and something else. Something that sounded almost like whispers in the darkness. The missing hours between Friday morning and Tuesday dawn held answers. But every clue led to more questions, and the forest seemed to be playing a game where the rules changed with each discovery. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. 8-year-old Emma Walsh, daughter of the jogger who'd found the shirt, approached Detective Harrison with a hand-drawn map clutched in her small fingers. Her innocent eyes held knowledge that made seasoned investigators uncomfortable. "There's another trail," she whispered, pointing to crayon marks on her paper. "The grown-ups don't know about it." Emma's map revealed a narrow deer path that branched off from the main hiking trail, hidden behind a cluster of thorny bushes. Local park rangers had no record of this route, yet the child described it with unsettling accuracy. She'd discovered it during family hikes, following it deeper than any adult would have allowed. Harrison's team bushwhacked through dense undergrowth to find Emma's secret path. Sure enough, a barely visible track wound between ancient oaks, marked only by broken twigs and compressed earth. The trail was old, worn smooth by decades of use, yet missing from every official map. Following the hidden route, investigators found evidence that made their blood run cold. 50 yards from the main trail, a cluster of broken branches showed signs of recent passage. Fabric caught on thorns matched the material of Sarah's hiking pants. But the most disturbing discovery lay 30 feet further. Michael's hiking boot rested against a fallen log, laces tied, sock still inside. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of how it had been removed. The boot sat upright, positioned as if someone had carefully placed it as a marker. The deer path continued deeper into forest darkness, where ancient trees blocked sunlight even at midday. Search dogs grew agitated along this route, whining and refusing to continue past certain points. Rex, the experienced bloodhound, tucked his tail and backed away from a specific bend in the trail. Harrison pressed forward where the dogs wouldn't go. The path led to a small clearing surrounded by massive pine trees, their trunks scarred with strange markings. Symbols carved deep into the bark formed patterns that local historians couldn't identify. The clearing felt wrong, as if nature itself recoiled from whatever had happened there. In the center of the clearing, investigators found a circle of stones arranged with geometric precision. No ashes, no evidence of fire, but the grass within the circle was dead, despite the surrounding vegetation being lush and green. The air tasted metallic, like blood mixed with ozone. Michael's wallet lay beside the stone circle, contents intact, credit cards and cash untouched. His driver's license photo seemed to stare up from the dead grass with accusing eyes. But there was something else, a business card tucked behind Michael's insurance information. The card was blank except for a single phone number written in red ink. As shadows lengthened in the unnatural clearing, Harrison felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from the tree line. The forest had revealed one of its secrets, but the revelation only deepened the mystery. Who knew about the hidden path? What did those carved symbols mean? And why had someone wanted the couple to be found piece by piece? The business card burned like ice in Harrison's pocket. But was he ready to dial that number and discover what was waiting on the other end? Detective Harrison stared at the mysterious business card for 2 hours before gathering the courage to dial. The number had no area code, just 7 digits written in what forensics confirmed was human blood. When he finally pressed the last digit, The phone didn't ring. It was answered, immediately by silence so complete it felt alive. "You found them," came a voice, neither male nor female, distorted as if filtered through water. The line crackled with static that formed almost musical patterns. Harrison's hand trembled as he gripped the phone tighter. "Who is this?" The question isn't who. It's what you're willing to sacrifice to get them back. The call ended with a click that echoed unnaturally long. When Harrison tried calling back, the number was disconnected. Phone company records showed no trace of the number ever existing in their system. That night, Harrison's dreams filled with visions of the stone circle and carved symbols. He woke at 3 a.m. with the taste of copper in his mouth and scratches on his arms that hadn't been there when he went to sleep. The scratches formed a pattern identical to the markings on the ancient pines. The next morning brought a package to Harrison's office. No postmark, no return address, delivered by a courier service that had no record of the pickup. Inside, wrapped in black cloth, was an antique leather journal bound with what appeared to be human hair. The journal's pages contained entries dating back to 1847, written in various hands and languages. Each entry described disappearances in Blackwood Forest, couples, families, lone hikers who vanished without explanation. The dates formed a pattern. Every 13 years, during the October new moon, Sarah and Michael had disappeared on October 13th, the new moon. One journal entry, dated 1960, stopped Harrison's blood cold. It described a young couple named Patricia and James Morrison who'd gone hiking and never returned. Their car was found 4 days later, keys in ignition, positioned exactly where Michael's Honda had been discovered. Patricia Morrison's sister had written a follow-up entry. Found Patricia's dress hanging from the old oak tree, torn and bloodied, but no body. James's boot discovered on the deer path. Police found them in pieces. Wallet here, shoe there, like breadcrumbs leading to that cursed clearing. But the final line of the entry sent ice through Harrison's veins. They came back. Wrong. Changed. We had to stop them before they brought others. The journal's last entry was dated October 13th, 1973, exactly 13 years before the next recorded disappearance. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. The ritual must be completed. The forest demands its price. But what returns is not what was taken. Harrison realized he was holding a record of something that had been happening for over a century. Every 13 years, couples disappeared in Blackwood Forest during the October new moon. Some were found in pieces, scattered like offerings. Others were never found at all. But according to the journal, some came back. As evening approached, Harrison's phone rang again. Same impossible number. Same distorted voice. Midnight. The clearing. Come alone, or they die screaming. This time, Harrison was ready with a trace. But the call originated from inside Blackwood Forest, from a location that should have had no cell tower coverage. The voice continued, "Bring the journal. It's time you learned what really happens in the dark." The choice was impossible. Venture into the forest alone and risk becoming another disappearance, or let Sarah and Michael face whatever fate awaited them in that unnatural clearing. Harrison entered Blackwood Forest at 11:30 p.m., armed with service weapon, flashlight, and backup GPS tracker. The journal felt heavy in his jacket pocket, its leather binding warm against his chest, despite the October chill. Behind him, a tactical team waited at the forest edge, ready to move if he missed his check-in call. The hidden deer path was different at night. Trees that had seemed merely old in daylight now loomed like ancient sentinels, their branches reaching down like gnarled fingers. His flashlight beam seemed weaker here, swallowed by darkness that pressed in from all sides. Strange sounds echoed through the trees, not quite animal, not quite human. Footsteps that matched his own rhythm, always just behind, always just out of sight. When he stopped to listen, the forest fell silent except for the sound of his own heartbeat drumming in his ears. The carved symbols on the pine trees glowed faintly in his flashlight beam, as if the bark held some internal luminescence. The patterns seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them, creating optical illusions that made his eyes water and his head spin. At 11:55 p.m., Harrison reached the clearing. Moonless sky stretched overhead like black velvet, but somehow the stone circle was clearly visible. The dead grass within had spread, forming intricate patterns that hurt to look at directly. In the center of the circle stood two figures. Sarah and Michael Thompson waited with their backs to Harrison, motionless as statues. Their hiking clothes were pristine, as if they'd just stepped off the main trail. But something was wrong with the way they stood. Too straight, too still, not even breathing. Harrison's radio crackled with static that formed whispered words. "Don't. Trust. What? You? See." The figures began to turn, movement unnaturally slow and mechanical. Harrison's finger found his weapon's trigger as Sarah's face came into view. Her eyes were completely black, reflecting his flashlight like pools of oil. When she smiled, her teeth were filed to points. Michael's transformation was worse. His face had been carved with the same symbols found on the trees. Fresh wounds that bled upward instead of down. When he opened his mouth to speak, centipedes spilled out instead of words. "Join us," Sarah's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off trees that couldn't produce such acoustics. "The forest is hungry. It's been waiting for you." Harrison backed away, radio buzzing with frantic calls from his backup team. But his GPS showed impossible readings. According to the device, he was simultaneously in 17 different locations, some hundreds of miles apart. The journal in his pocket grew scorching hot. When he pulled it out, its pages flipped open to a section he hadn't seen before. Fresh ink spread across blank pages, writing itself, "They are not Sarah and Michael. They are what the forest creates from what it takes. Every 13 years, it needs new material, new shapes to wear." The false Sarah and Michael began walking toward him, their movements jerky like marionettes, controlled by an amateur puppeteer. Behind them, the darkness between the trees revealed more figures, all the missing couples from the journal entries, all wearing the same black eyes and pointed teeth. Harrison's backup radio screamed with static and terror. "Detective! Your GPS signal just vanished. We're coming in." But as the words faded, Harrison realized the most terrifying truth of all. He'd been in the forest for 6 hours, not 30 minutes. Dawnlight was beginning to filter through the canopy above. Time itself was broken here, and his backup team would find nothing but another empty clearing and another mysterious disappearance. The circle of stones began to glow with the same sickly light as the carved symbols. Whatever was about to happen, Harrison had walked willingly into a trap that had been set over a century ago. The ground beneath the stone circle began to crack, revealing not earth, but carved stone steps descending into absolute darkness. Ancient symbols covered every surface, pulsing with the same unnatural light. The smell rising from below was indescribable. Decay mixed with incense, mixed with something that might once have been human. Harrison's flashlight illuminated the first few steps before its beam was swallowed entirely. The journal in his hands flipped to a new page, words appearing as if written by an invisible hand. The temple predates the forest. The forest was planted to hide it. The false Sarah and Michael stood at the edge of the opening, their black eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. Behind them, the gathering crowd of missing persons formed a perfect circle around the now revealed entrance. All of them waited with the same unnatural stillness. "Come down," they spoke in unison, voices harmonizing in ways human vocal cords couldn't achieve. "See what you've been protecting. See what the town built this forest to conceal." Harrison's radio crackled once more, but now the static formed coherent words. "Detective Harrison, this is command. Your GPS shows you're 300 feet underground. That's impossible. Please respond." 300 feet underground. But he stood on level ground in a forest clearing. Unless the reading was correct, and everything he thought he knew about this place was wrong. Against every survival instinct, Harrison began descending the stone steps. The walls closed in quickly, carved with symbols that seemed to move in his peripheral vision. The journal grew hot enough to burn his hands, its pages fluttering open, to reveal detailed architectural drawings of the structure he was now inside. The temple had been built by something that understood human anatomy, but wasn't human itself. Corridors designed for figures with 2 long limbs, ceiling heights that accommodated creatures twice normal human proportions. Yet the craftsmanship was exquisite, every surface polished to mirror smoothness, despite obvious great age. At the first landing, Harrison found carved tablets covered in script that hurt to read, but the journal translated automatically, words appearing in English as his eyes moved across the alien text. "We came from between the stars when the earth was young. We built this place to reshape flesh, to create servants from the native creatures." The steps continued down and down and down. Harrison's GPS now showed impossible depth readings, as if he was descending through the Earth's crust itself. But somehow he could still breathe, still feel air moving through chambers that should have been vacuum at this depth. On the 10th landing, he found them. The real Sarah and Michael Thompson hung suspended in crystalline chambers filled with luminescent fluid. Their bodies were unchanged, perfectly preserved, but their eyes stared with desperate awareness. They were alive, conscious, trapped in some form of stasis while their shapes were used above. Sarah's mouth formed silent words. "Help us." Michael's eyes tracked Harrison's movement with recognition and hope. Whatever process was keeping them alive down here had maintained their minds intact. But as Harrison approached their chambers, the temple around him began to shift. Walls rearranged themselves, corridors sealed and reopened, stairs multiplied into impossible geometric patterns. The structure was alive, responding to his presence. The journal's pages burned with new text. The temple chooses its own guardians. It has been waiting for someone who could read its secrets, someone who could help it expand beyond this small forest. Behind him, the sound of footsteps echoed down the stone stairs. The false versions of Sarah and Michael were coming, along with every missing person from the past century. They moved with purpose now, no longer the jerky marionette movements from above. Harrison realized he faced a choice that would determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone who had ever entered Blackwood Forest. The temple wanted a new guardian, someone to help it spread its influence beyond these hidden chambers. The approaching footsteps echoed with mathematical precision, each step perfectly timed, perfectly placed. Harrison counted 17 distinct sets of feet, all moving in supernatural synchronization. The temple's collected servants were coming to claim him. But the journal revealed one final secret. Its last pages described a ritual not of binding, but of breaking. The original builders had included a fail-safe, a way to collapse their creation if it ever threatened to spread beyond its containment. The symbols Harrison had memorized weren't just decoration. They were a deactivation sequence. The crystalline chambers holding Sarah and Michael began to crack as Harrison approached. The luminescent fluid drained away, leaving the couple gasping and shivering on cold stone floors. Their eyes were their own again, human and afraid. "The whole town knows," Michael whispered through blue lips. "Mayor, police chief, city council. They've been feeding it couples for generations, keeping it satisfied so it doesn't take anyone else." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "They chose us because we had no family nearby. No one to ask hard questions if we disappeared for a few days before being found dead in some distant river." The conspiracy reached deeper than Harrison had imagined. Blackwood Forest wasn't just hiding an ancient temple. The entire town of Millbrook had been built around it, designed to provide regular sacrifices to keep the thing below dormant. Every missing persons report, every unexplained death, every hiking accident had been carefully orchestrated. The footsteps reached the final landing. 17 figures descended toward them, led by the false Sarah and Michael. But now Harrison could see past their disguises. Beneath the familiar faces were something else entirely. Tall, pale creatures with too many joints, skin that rippled like water, eyes that were holes leading to impossible depths. The journal's final entry wrote itself. "Break the pattern. Shatter the cycle. Let the light reach the darkness." Harrison understood. The stone circle above wasn't just a ritual site. It was a seal, keeping the temple's influence contained within the forest boundaries. Break the seal properly, expose the temple to natural light, and the entire structure would collapse. But doing so meant bringing down tons of earth and rock on everyone currently inside, including Sarah, Michael, and himself. "Do it," Sarah whispered, reading his expression. "Whatever it takes to stop this from spreading." Michael nodded weakly. "Better we die here than let it take more families." The creatures reached the chamber, no longer bothering to maintain their human appearance. They moved with liquid grace, limbs bending in ways that defied anatomy. When they spoke, it was with the voice of the temple itself, echoing from the walls. "Join willingly, and we spare your town. Resist, and we expand beyond the forest. Your choice, detective." Harrison pulled out his service weapon, not to fight the creatures, but to target specific symbols carved into the chamber walls. The journal had shown him which ones to break, in which order. Each shot would weaken the structural integrity of the ancient seal above. The first bullet struck carved stone, and the entire temple shuddered. Centuries of accumulated power began to unravel. The creatures shrieked with voices like tearing metal, their forms becoming unstable as the temple's influence waned. Harrison fired again and again, targeting each symbol in the prescribed sequence. With each impact, cracks appeared in the chamber ceiling. Dust rained down as the massive stone circle above began to crumble. The creatures lunged toward him with inhuman speed. But Sarah and Michael, freed from their crystalline prisons, fought with desperate strength. Their human determination proved stronger than the temple's fading power. As Harrison fired his final shot, the last symbol shattered completely. The seal broke with a sound like worlds ending, and sunlight poured down through the collapsing structure above. Where the light touched the creatures, they dissolved like shadows at dawn. The temple died with a scream that shook the earth for miles. Ancient stone split along lines of power that had held for millennia, and the careful architecture of alien minds crumbled into rubble. Harrison grabbed Sarah and Michael, pulling them toward what he hoped was a way out, as tons of debris rained down around them. The journal in his pocket burst into flames, its purpose finally complete. But as it burned, the pages released glowing sparks that formed a path through the collapsing maze. The temple's own knowledge guided them toward safety, as if some part of it wanted to ensure witnesses survived to tell the truth. They ran through corridors that reshaped themselves even as they fell apart. Walls melted, floors tilted at impossible angles, and gravity seemed negotiable. Behind them, the sound of pursuing footsteps faded as the creatures dissolved in the growing shafts of sunlight. Above ground, the stone circle imploded with a roar that brought Harrison's backup team running. The ancient trees surrounding the clearing toppled inward, drawn into a sinkhole that opened where the ritual site had been. What had once been hidden deep underground was now exposed to open sky. The three survivors burst from a fissure in the Ichai, earth just as the last of the temple structure vanished into the growing crater. They rolled away, from the collapsing ground, coughing dust and gasping for air that tasted of freedom instead of ancient decay. Harrison's radio crackled with frantic voices. "Detective! We have you on visual. Medical team en route." But as paramedics treated Sarah and Michael for exposure and dehydration, Harrison realized their problems were just beginning. The temple's collapse had been felt throughout Millbrook. Buildings cracked, windows shattered, and the carefully maintained conspiracy of silence was about to crumble along with everything else. Mayor Patricia Blackwood arrived at the scene within minutes, her face pale with terror. She wasn't concerned about the missing couple or Harrison's condition. She was staring into the crater where her town's deepest secret had once been hidden. "You don't understand what you've done," she whispered to Harrison as cameras from 3 news stations began arriving. The temple kept other things contained, older things, hungrier things. As if summoned by her words, a new sound emerged from the depths of the crater. Not the mechanical precision of the temple's servants, but something organic, something that had been imprisoned far deeper than the alien structure, waiting for its chance at freedom. The ground trembled again, but this time the vibrations came from below, from chambers and caverns that ran beneath the entire town. Whatever had built the temple hadn't been the first to claim this place. They had been wardens, keeping something even worse locked away. Sarah pointed toward the forest line with a shaking hand. The trees were moving, not swaying in wind, but actually relocating themselves. Ancient oaks walked on root systems that had emerged from soil, repositioning themselves in patterns that formed new symbols, new containment circles. The forest is trying to rebuild the seal, Michael realized, his voice hoarse from the temple's stasis fluid. But it can't do it alone. Harrison looked at the journal's ashes scattered around the crater's edge. Some pages had survived, their symbols still glowing faintly. The instructions for breaking the temple had been only the first half of a longer ritual. The second half dealt with containing what the temple had been built to guard against. Mayor Blackwood knelt beside the surviving, pages, tears streaming down her face. "My great-great-grandmother wrote part of this. The town's founders knew what was down there. They made a deal with the temple builders. Feed the lesser evil to keep the greater one sleeping." As darkness fell, phosphorescent light began emerging from the crater's depths. Not the cold alien glow of the temple, but something warmer and infinitely more dangerous. something that had been dreaming in the deep places of the earth, waiting for the day when its prison would finally crack open. The phosphorescent glow intensified as something vast stirred in the crater's depths. Harrison's seismic readings showed movement at impossible depths, something the size of a city block, shifting after eons of stillness. The ground beneath Millbrook buckled and cracked as whatever lay below began to wake. Sarah clutched the remnants of the burned journal, its surviving pages revealing the true horror. The alien temple hadn't been built to harvest humans. It had been constructed as a feeding tube, channeling human life force downward to keep something much older sedated. Every disappearance, every sacrifice had been a dose of spiritual morphine for a creature that predated human civilization. Mayor Blackwood's confession came in broken whispers. The town records go back to 1823. The settlers found this place already occupied by something. It spoke to them in dreams, promised them prosperity if they would help it sleep, build a town above, send down offerings, keep the Deep One dreaming. Emergency vehicles surrounded the crater as news spread beyond Millbrook. State police, federal agents, and scientists arrived to find a hole in the earth that defied geological explanation. Core samples from the crater walls showed impossible age, rock formations that predated the continent's existence. But the visiting experts brought something unexpected: recognition. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenoarchaeologist from MIT, had studied similar sites across the globe. Her face went ashen as she examined the crater and surviving journal pages. "This is the 7th location," she told Harrison privately. "We've found similar structures on every continent. Ancient temples built on top of even more ancient chambers. Always the same pattern. Human settlements providing regular sacrifices to keep something massive and hostile dormant." The implications were staggering. Whatever slept beneath Millbrook wasn't unique. A network of feeding sites spanned the globe, all connected to entities that had been here long before humanity evolved. The alien temple builders had been groundskeepers, maintaining a planetary prison system. Dr. Vasquez showed Harrison classified photographs from the other sites: collapsed temples in Siberia, sealed caverns in the Amazon, underwater ruins in the Pacific. All had been feeding human life force to things that shouldn't exist, keeping them in artificial hibernation. "The governments know," she explained, "have known for decades. The sites are monitored, maintained, kept active. Millbrook was scheduled for a major feeding this month. Your missing couple was supposed to be the appetizer for something much larger." As night deepened, the phosphorescent glow from the crater began forming patterns, symbols that matched those from the journal but seemed infinitely older, as if the temple builders had merely copied designs they'd found already carved in stone. The patterns hurt to look at directly, creating optical illusions that made reality seem flexible. Sarah suddenly gasped, her eyes reflecting the strange light from below. "It's dreaming about the surface," she whispered. "I can feel its thoughts. It's been dreaming about this moment for thousands of years." Michael grabbed her shoulders as she began to sway. "Fight it. Don't let it pull you back." But Sarah's expression became distant, her voice taking on harmonics that echoed from the crater. "It remembers when the oceans were different colors, when the stars were arranged differently in the sky. It was here before the ice ages, before the mountains formed, and it's so very hungry." The ground shuddered again, and this time buildings throughout Millbrook began to collapse. Not from earthquake damage, but from something actively pulling at their foundations from below. The entity was using the town's infrastructure as handholds, preparing to surface after eons of forced sleep. Dr. Vasquez grabbed her satellite phone, dialing numbers that connected directly to military command centers. This is Prometheus Station 7. We have a full emergence event. Authorization code Delta 77. We need the contingency military helicopters arrived within minutes of Dr. Vasquez's call, carrying equipment that didn't appear in any public arsenal. Black-suited operatives secured a perimeter while technicians assembled devices that hummed with electromagnetic energy. This wasn't a rescue operation. It was damage control on a scale Harrison had never imagined. Colonel James Parker took command of the site, his weathered face showing the strain of a man who'd seen too many impossible things. He studied the crater with instruments that measured frequencies beyond human perception, his readings confirming everyone's worst fears. Entity designation Omega-7 is at 90% emergence threshold, he reported into his encrypted radio. Recommend immediate implementation of Scorched Earth Protocol. Harrison grabbed the colonel's arm. There are still people in the town. Families. Children. Detective, this thing has been feeding on human consciousness for millennia. If it fully emerges, those families become its first course in a meal that will eventually consume every living mind on the planet. The phosphorescent glow from the crater suddenly flared, and Sarah collapsed with a scream that echoed from speakers throughout the command post. Somehow, her voice was broadcasting through electronic equipment, carrying words in languages that predated written history. Michael knelt beside her as she convulsed. It's trying to use her as a translator. She spent time in its chambers. She has a connection now. Through Sarah's lips came a voice that belonged to something vast and ancient. I have been patient. I have accepted your small offerings, your periodic tributes. But the feeding cycle is broken. Now I must take what I need directly. Hey! The ground beneath Millbrook began to bulge upward as something immense pushed against the Earth's crust. Houses tilted at impossible angles, streets cracked in geometric patterns that resembled neural networks. The entity was using the town's layout as a brain, turning human infrastructure into its own nervous system. Colonel Parker's team deployed their strange equipment in a wide circle around the crater. The devices projected barrier fields designed to contain entities that existed, partially outside normal space-time, but readings showed the barriers were already failing. The thing below was too large, too powerful. Dr. Vasquez pulled Harrison aside, her voice urgent. There's one option the military won't consider. The journal fragments mention a binding ritual, but it requires willing participants. Someone has to stay connected to the entity, serve as a permanent anchor to keep it dormant. The implications hit Harrison like ice water. Someone would have to sacrifice their consciousness, their humanity, to become a living seal over the creature's prison. They would remain aware, but trapped, feeding their life force to keep the entity asleep for potentially centuries. Sarah's eyes suddenly focused, her own voice returning. I'll do it. I can feel what it wants, how it thinks. I can hold it down. No, Michael said firmly. We do it together, like everything else. Colonel Parker overheard their conversation, his expression grim. The binding ritual requires 3 anchor points to be stable. Military volunteers have been trained for this contingency, but civilians have stronger connections to local consciousness fields. Harrison realized what the colonel was asking. 3 people would need to sacrifice their freedom, their lives, to become permanent guardians over the sleeping entity. The town would continue to exist, but it would always be a prison, watched over by souls trapped between human and something else. The creature's emergence accelerated, Tentacles the size of subway cars began emerging from the crater, followed by masses of flesh that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could process. Reality distorted around it, making straight lines curve and solid matter become translucent. "Decision time," Colonel Parker announced as his barriers continued to fail. "Binding ritual or nuclear sterilization. Those are our only options." Sarah and Michael were already walking toward the crater, hand in hand. They turned to look at Harrison, their faces calm despite the chaos around them. "Someone needs to tell people the truth," Sarah called out, "about all the sights, all the sleeping things. The world needs to know what's really under their feet." But as Harrison faced the choice between joining them or watching Millbrook disappear in nuclear fire, something unexpected happened. The he entity's voice spoke through every electronic device in the area simultaneously, delivering a message that changed everything. The entity's voice came through every radio, every phone, every electronic device within 50 miles, speaking words that rewrote everything they thought they knew about the situation. "I am not your enemy. I am your guardian." The massive tentacles emerging from the crater moved with surprising gentleness, carefully avoiding the evacuation vehicles and rescue workers. The creature's phosphorescent glow shifted to warmer hues, less alien and more protective. The temple builders were not my captors. They were my partners. Together, we have been holding back something far worse. Something that feeds not on consciousness, but on the complete absence of it. Something that turns living worlds into empty husks. Dr. Vasquez dropped her instruments, understanding flooding her face. The Void Runners, the theoretical entities from deep space that consume entire solar systems, they're real. Through Sarah's connection, images flooded the minds of everyone present. Visions of dead worlds spinning through space, their surfaces scoured clean of life. Civilizations that had thrived for millions of years, reduced to silent stone in a matter of days. "My species fought them across the galaxy," the entity continued. "We are the last survivors, embedded in worlds throughout this arm of the spiral. We maintain barriers, psychic defenses that hide inhabited systems from Void Runner scouts." Colonel Parker's readings suddenly made sense. The entity wasn't trying to emerge. It was trying to strengthen the planetary defense grid. The feeding schedule, the human sacrifices, had been providing energy for a shield that protected Earth from detection by cosmic predators. "But the barriers are failing," the entity explained, its voice carrying undertones of genuine fear. "Your species has grown too large, too widespread. The psychic noise of 7 billion minds is beginning to bleed through our concealment. The Void Runners will notice soon." The tentacles reached toward Sarah and Michael, but instead of grabbing them, they gently touched their foreheads. Suddenly, both humans could see what the entity saw. A vast network of consciousness spanning the galaxy, with Earth as one bright node hidden among the shadows. "I need willing partners, not sacrifices," the entity continued. "Humans who can help me adapt the barriers to work with your expanding civilization instead of hiding from it. Your minds are different from previous species, more chaotic, more creative. You might be able to find solutions we never considered." Harrison stepped forward, finally understanding the true choice before them. Not between death and imprisonment, but between isolation and evolution, between hiding from the universe and helping to defend it. "What do you need from us?" he asked. The entity's form began to shift, becoming less alien and more comprehensible. It showed them visions of humans, and entity consciousness working. Together, building new kinds of barriers that used human creativity and alien knowledge in combination. Some of your people would need to join with us permanently, becoming bridge consciousnesses between species. But they would retain their humanity, their individual awareness. They would simply gain access to larger perspectives. Sarah and Michael looked at each other, then at Harrison. It's like becoming cosmic lighthouse keepers, Sarah realized. Watching for threats, maintaining the warning systems. Dr. Vasquez was already taking notes, her scientific mind racing. We could establish research stations, create a new field of study, xenopsychology, barrier engineering. But Colonel Parker remained skeptical. How do we know this isn't just a more sophisticated deception? How do we verify any of this? The entity's response came not in words, but in direct experience. Everyone present suddenly found themselves experiencing a brief moment of cosmic perspective, seeing Earth from the entity's viewpoint, understanding the delicate balance that had kept their world safe for millennia. They saw the approaching void runners, still distant, but definitely heading toward this sector of space. They felt the growing strain on the barrier network as Earth's psychic footprint expanded. And they understood that within a decade, maybe less, the choice would be made for them. Work with us willingly, and your species survives to explore the stars, the entity offered. Refuse, and you become another silent world spinning in the dark. The weight of the entity's revelation settled over the assembled group like a heavy blanket. Harrison looked around at the faces surrounding the crater. Scientists, soldiers, and civilians all grappling with the same impossible decision. Join with an alien consciousness to help defend Earth, or risk the complete extinction of human civilization. Sarah stepped closer to the crater's edge, her eyes reflecting the entity's phosphorescent glow. "I can feel others like you," she said softly. "Under different cities, in ocean trenches, buried in mountain ranges. You're all connected, aren't you? All working together to keep us safe." "Yes," the entity confirmed, "but we are weakening. The barriers require constant maintenance, and your species' expanding consciousness creates new vulnerabilities every day. We need human minds to help us adapt, to find solutions that neither species could discover alone." Michael joined Sarah at the crater's edge. "What happens to the people who volunteer? Do they stop being human?" The entity's response came with gentle warmth. "They become more than human, expanded, aware of truths that span galaxies while remaining rooted in the world they protect. Your friend Jennifer, who found the first clue, she sensed our presence because she already has the sensitivity required. Your detective here has been making intuitive leaps throughout this investigation because his mind naturally thinks in the patterns we need." Harrison felt a chill of recognition. His ability to solve cases, to see connections others missed, had he been unconsciously tapping into the entity's influence? Had his entire career been preparation for this moment? Dr. Vasquez approached, with her scientific instruments, taking readings that made her eyes widen. The electromagnetic patterns around the crater are harmonizing with specific human brainwave frequencies. It's not taking over minds, it's creating a resonance, a partnership. Colonel Parker remained skeptical, but his objections were weakening. Even if this is all true, how do we convince world governments to cooperate? How do we explain to the public that their reality has been managed by alien entities for thousands of years? Gradually, the entity suggested, begin with small groups, researchers who can verify our claims. Let the truth emerge naturally as humanity proves ready to accept its larger role in galactic affairs. The ground around the crater began to stabilize as the entity's emergence slowed. It wasn't trying to escape anymore. It was waiting for humanity's answer. Sarah turned to face the assembled group, her voice carrying new authority. I've felt what it's like to be connected to something larger. The fear, the loneliness of thinking we're alone in the universe, that goes away. But the love, the creativity, the things that make us human, those get stronger. Michael nodded in agreement. We came here for a simple anniversary hike. Now, we're being offered the chance to help save our entire species. How do we say no to that? Harrison realized this was the moment everything had been building toward. Not just the investigation, but his entire life. Every case he'd solved, every mystery he'd unraveled, had been preparing him to understand this choice. I'm in, he said simply. But we do this carefully. We verify everything, we maintain human autonomy, and we keep the option to withdraw if things go wrong. One by one, the others voiced their agreement. Dr. Vasquez would lead the scientific verification team. Colonel Parker would handle military liaison and security concerns. Sarah and Michael would be the first voluntary bridge consciousnesses, maintaining their connection while helping establish protocols for others. As their decisions crystallized, the entity's presence became less overwhelming, more collaborative. The phosphorescent light from the crater softened to something that felt almost like sunrise. Then we begin, the entity said, its voice now carrying harmonics of human speech. The first step is understanding. The second is preparation. The third is survival. But even as hope replaced fear, Harrison couldn't shake one final question. What if they were wrong? What if this was all an elaborate deception, and they had just agreed to help something monstrous? Only time would reveal whether they had saved humanity or doomed it. 6 months later, Detective Harrison stood in what had once been Blackwood Forest, now transformed into humanity's first consciousness research station. The crater had been converted into a sophisticated facility where human and alien minds worked together to strengthen Earth's psychic defenses. Sarah and Michael Thompson had been the first volunteers to undergo the bridging process. They remained recognizably themselves, but their awareness now spanned dimensions that ordinary humans couldn't perceive. They could sense the approaching Void Runners, still years away, but definitely coming. More importantly, they could help design new barrier technologies that used human creativity in ways the entity had never imagined. The secret was spreading carefully, as planned. Dr. Vasquez led a team of researchers from 17 nations, all sworn to secrecy until humanity was ready for the full truth. Government black sites around the world were being converted into similar facilities, each one built over an entity that had been guarding Earth for millennia. Harrison's role had evolved as well. No longer just a detective, he now served as a liaison between human law enforcement and the Cosmic Protection Network. Missing persons cases took on new significance when they might be evidence of Void Runner infiltration or barrier failures. But the most remarkable change was in the volunteers themselves. Each person who joined the bridging program retained their humanity while gaining access to galactic perspectives. They could feel the pulse of life across star systems, understand threats that operated on cosmic timescales, and contribute uniquely human insights to defense strategies that had remained unchanged for eons. The entity that had once seemed so alien now felt almost familiar. Through the bridge consciousnesses, it was learning human concepts like humor, art, and love. In return, Humans were discovering that consciousness itself was far more flexible and expansive than they had ever imagined. Today marked a special milestone. The first group of children born to bridge consciousness parents had begun showing natural telepathic abilities. These children could perceive both human and entity thought patterns without technological assistance. They were the next step in human evolution, naturally adapted to live in a universe where mind-to-mind communication spanned galaxies. As Harrison walked through the research station, he passed laboratories where impossible experiments were yielding practical results. Teams of humans and entities were developing faster-than-light communication arrays, consciousness-powered defensive shields, and even theoretical designs for starships that could travel between dimensions. But perhaps the most important development was happening in schools and universities across the globe. Carefully selected students were being introduced to theoretical xenopsychology and hypothetical consciousness studies. The next generation was being prepared for a universe far stranger and more wonderful than their parents had ever imagined. Harrison's final report lay open on his desk, documenting the transformation from missing persons case to first contact protocol. The blood-stained shirt that had started everything now hung in a place of honor, a reminder that the most extraordinary discoveries often began with the simplest mysteries. Outside his window, the night sky looked the same as always. But Harrison now knew that between those stars, other worlds were watching and waiting. Some held allies who had fought the Void Runners for millions of years. Others had already fallen to cosmic predators who consumed entire civilizations. Earth was no longer alone, but it was no longer innocent either. Humanity had accepted its role as guardians of consciousness itself, protectors of the spark of awareness that made life more than just chemical reactions in the dark. The investigation that had begun with a couple's disappearance in a dark forest had led to humanity's graduation into galactic citizenship, and somewhere in the depths beneath the research station, ancient minds and human hearts worked together to ensure that the light of consciousness would continue to shine among the stars. If this story left you as impacted as it did me, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and comment your opinion below. Each comment is like a new piece that can help unravel other mysteries like this one. Because now we know the truth. We are not alone, and we never were.